From the moment of your birth, long before you had language, logic, or memory, your psyche began its dance with reflection, and the first mirror in which you glimpsed your existence was not made of glass, but of flesh, of gaze, of tone and touch. That mirror was your mother. Before you knew yourself, you were being known by her. You looked into her face not to see her, but to see you, and whether she met your gaze with warmth, absence, anxiety, or resentment, something within you was forming in response. That is the mystery of the infant psyche. It takes in impressions not as observations, but as truths. Your sense of worth, your right to be, your place in the world. These were first communicated not through words, but through her presence. If she smiled when you cried, you learned that your pain was valid. If she withdrew when you expressed need, you learned to suppress your hunger. If she responded inconsistently, you became confused about what parts of you were safe to show. Every look, every embrace, every moment of attunement or disconnection became a brushstroke in the earliest portrait of your identity. She was not just your mother. She was the stage upon which your soul took its first steps. And yet she was not a perfect mirror. No mother is. She mirrored you through the filter of her own wounds, her own history, her own unconscious. The image you received back was not just your reflection, but a mixture. Your true self blended with her unmet needs, her dreams, her disappointments. This is not about blame. It is about understanding. Because until you question the reflection you first received, you remain bound to a self-image that may not have been yours to carry. The child does not ask whether the mirror is accurate. The child accepts, the child adapts, and in adapting, the child learns which parts of the self are acceptable and which must be hidden. These disowned parts retreat into the unconscious. They become the shadow, the unknown within, waiting to be reclaimed. To understand this is to begin the long journey back, to separate your reflection from hers, to discern where she ends and you begin, to peel away the layers of identity shaped by her gaze. Only then can the true self, once distorted in the mirror of early attachment, begin to come into focus. Beneath the individual story of your mother lies something older, something collective, something ancient, the archetype of the feminine. Long before she was your mother, she was a daughter. Before she held you, she was held, or left unheld, by a lineage of women shaped by silence, sacrifice, and survival. The mother you knew was not born in a vacuum. She emerged from a tapestry of generational stories, beliefs, and traumas that stretch far beyond her personal life. The wounded feminine is not merely a psychological concept. It is a lived inheritance. It manifests in the way a woman learns to withhold her voice, numb her feelings, carry shame in her body, or equate love with self-abandonment. It's in the way she's taught to be strong by being silent, nurturing by being depleted, virtuous by being invisible. These wounds do not begin with her, but she becomes the vessel through which they are passed down subtly, unconsciously, inevitably. And so, the child receives not only milk, but memory, not only comfort, but conflict. When you looked into your mother's eyes, you were also staring into the pain of generations. Perhaps she loved you deeply, yet could not touch her own softness. Perhaps she protected you fiercely, yet never learned how to protect herself. Perhaps she disciplined you harshly, not out of malice, but out of a belief that love must be earned. These contradictions live in the wounded feminine, the simultaneous presence of fierce devotion and deep emotional disconnection. To heal, you must first witness this inheritance without judgment. You must see the woman before the mother, and the girl before the woman. You must trace her silence back to her own mother's fear, her emotional distance back to her own abandonment, her overprotectiveness back to her own vulnerability that was never seen, never named, never allowed to exist. The wound of the feminine is not only hers to carry, but it lives in you too, especially if you are her child, especially if you felt responsible for her sadness, for her outbursts, for her fragility, especially if you became the caretaker of her moods before you understood your own. The child of a wounded feminine archetype often becomes the emotional anchor for the mother, reversing roles, carrying burdens not meant for small shoulders. And though this may seem like love, it is an entanglement, a fusion that blurs the line between self and other, between care and control, between compassion and captivity. This is the invisible inheritance, the unspoken rules, the suppressed emotions, the unconscious expectations passed from mother to child like a secret ritual. To awaken is to break the spell, to feel the sorrow that was never spoken, to grieve the warmth that was absent, to reclaim the parts of yourself that were shaped in response to a woman who, despite her love, was not whole within herself. The wounded feminine does not just live in women. It lives in all of us, in our collective psyche. It shows up in the way we dismiss intuition, fear softness, ridicule vulnerability, and glorify suffering as strength. It is not healed by rebellion, nor by resentment. It is healed by remembering, by witnessing the pain without becoming it, by giving voice to what generations kept silent, and by slowly, bravely embodying a version of femininity and humanity that is no longer defined by wounds. Love in its purest form is expansive. It allows, it accepts, it frees. But in the early womb of the psyche, love is not abstract, it is embodied. It is the way a mother holds her child, the tone in her voice, the rhythm of her presence. And yet, love can be corrupted, not out of cruelty, but through fear, insecurity, and unconscious need. What many of us came to call love in childhood was something far more complex, a fusion of affection, obligation, control, and anxiety. It felt like love, it looked like love, but it came at the cost of the self. This is the tragedy and the confusion of early attachment, that what feeds us can also bind us. The infant does not distinguish between healthy love and possessive love, between nurturing and manipulation. All it knows is survival, and so, if the price of being close to the mother is compliance, emotionally, behaviorally, spiritually, the child will pay it without hesitation. To displease the mother is to risk disconnection, and for the child, disconnection feels like death. Control, in this context, does not always appear as overt domination. It can be subtle, tender even, a guilt-laced sigh, a disappointed glance, a silence that says more than words ever could, a gesture of help that is never optional. It's the unspoken message, I love you, but only when you are who I need you to be. This kind of love teaches the child to shapeshift, to become what is expected, to suppress what is inconvenient, to mold the self in the image of the mother's comfort. And in doing so, the child learns a perilous lesson, that love is something to earn, something to keep by being small, obedient, pleasing. The boundary between love and control dissolves. Intimacy becomes entanglement. Authenticity becomes a threat. The mother's emotional state becomes the compass by which the child navigates their own feelings. And when the child begins to explore independence, to claim space, to say no, these natural steps towards selfhood are interpreted as betrayal. This early confusion carries into adulthood. One may continue to attract relationships that feel familiar, those that echo the original pattern, partners who love, but conditionally, friends who give, but with hidden expectations. Even success, freedom, and joy may unconsciously feel dangerous, for they threaten the roles you learn to perform to feel safe. You may find yourself repeatedly returning to dynamics where love means self-denial, where care comes with invisible chains. To untangle this knot is not a matter of judgment. It is a matter of deep inner inquiry. You must ask yourself, was it truly love, or was it an arrangement? Was I seen, or was I managed? Was I nurtured, or was I shaped into something easier for her to handle? There is a kind of grief that surfaces when you realize that what you called love may have been control, not because she didn't love you, but because she didn't know how to love without fear. Her own childhood may have taught her that love means possession, that safety requires obedience, that motherhood is performance rather than presence. These beliefs, unless questioned, are passed down like sacred traditions, unchallenged, unnamed, unhealed. True love does not demand your disappearance. It does not ask you to shrink, to silence, to sever parts of yourself for someone else's peace. And yet, the child does not know this. The child loves even when it hurts. The child adapts even when it breaks the soul. Healing begins with the courage to see this confusion clearly, not to discard love, but to purify it, not to blame the mother, but to reclaim the self that was hidden beneath her expectations. To separate love from control is to walk the delicate path from survival to sovereignty, from fusion to freedom, from inherited roles to authentic being. The mother does not only dwell in the outer world. She takes up residence in the psyche, in memory, in dream, in symbol. And whether you remember her with longing or resentment, admiration or pain, she becomes the canvas upon which your unconscious begins to paint. But what most do not realize is this: the mother often becomes the first repository for the shadow. The shadow is not evil, it is unlived. It is not the villain, it is the exiled self. The shadow consists of all that we were not allowed to express, all that was rejected or feared in us, all that we deemed unsafe to reveal, and because we cannot bear to face it within ourselves, we unconsciously cast it outward to others, and most often onto the mother. She becomes too much or not enough. She becomes the reason we feel small, the cause of our sorrow, the figure we return to when trying to explain our stagnation, our failures, our rage. Even long after we have grown, even if she has passed away, the psychic imprint remains. We wrestle not with her body, but with her echo, and sometimes that echo is loudest in our silence. The child, in needing to remain good, innocent, and worthy of love, disowns the darker emotions, anger, envy, rebellion, desire, and these parts do not vanish. They descend, they fall into the unconscious where they fester and grow, but because we cannot bear to admit their presence in ourselves, we see them in her. We remember her as critical, yet we forget our own judgment. We recall her as suffocating, but overlook the ways we sought her attention. We call her manipulative, while denying our own use of subtle control to stay loved. Projection is never random. The qualities we most reject in her are often mirrors of the aspects we are unwilling to recognize in ourselves. And so long as the projection remains unconscious, we remain entangled, caught in a dynamic where she represents not who she truly is, but the fragments of ourselves we cannot claim. To withdraw the projection is one of the most painful and liberating tasks on the path of inner work. It means admitting that the rage we feel may not be about her, but about the part of us that gave our power away. It means acknowledging that she was human, flawed, frightened, fragmented, not the all-powerful figure we made her into. For whether we idealize or demonize her, we are still projecting. We are still giving her parts of ourselves we have yet to retrieve. This is not to say your pain isn't real, nor that your wounds aren't valid. It is to say that healing does not come from staying in the story where she is the sole author of your suffering. It comes from turning inward, from descending into the shadow, from facing the grief of what was not given, and the guilt of what we did with that absence, and it is rarely a one-time reckoning. The projection reappears in many forms, especially in other relationships. You may find yourself arguing with a partner, but really, you're arguing with your mother through them. You may avoid intimacy, not because you don't want to be close, but because closeness reminds you of dependency, control, or silence. These are the shadow's disguises, repetitive patterns, misplaced emotions, unexamined fears that circle back to the original source. But the moment you begin to see it, not just her, but the projection, you reclaim a piece of your soul. You step out of the loop. You cease to be the wounded child seeking a different ending to the same story. Instead, you become the witness, the one who sees without judgment, who holds without collapsing, who says, "This was mine, and this was hers, and now I return to myself what I once gave away." To retrieve the shadow is to retrieve your freedom, and the mother, once a figure of confusion or pain, becomes something else entirely, a mirror that cracked to show you the hidden parts of yourself. There comes a moment, often unannounced, often painful, when you begin to realize that healing cannot happen inside the same psychological house where the wound was formed. That moment is the beginning of individuation, the long, often agonizing process of becoming who you truly are, apart from who you were taught to be. And for many, this journey cannot begin until they emotionally separate from the mother, not in rebellion, not in rejection, but in recognition of selfhood. As long as the mother remains fused with your inner identity, your psyche remains in a state of dependency. You may look grown on the outside, adult in your responsibilities, intelligent in your thinking, but emotionally you are still seeking her gaze, her approval, her forgiveness, her permission to exist. This is not immaturity, it is the residue of primal attachment, of the sacred bond formed before language, before logic. But the very intimacy of that bond can become a psychic prison if not examined. To individuate is to step beyond this fusion. It is to ask, sometimes for the first time, who am I without her pain? Who am I without her story? Who am I without the roles I played to keep her comfortable? These are not acts of cruelty, but of courage. The self cannot emerge where it is still entangled. And emotional enmeshment, though often mistaken for closeness, is a form of spiritual suffocation. You may be loyal, attentive, loving, but if these qualities cost you your truth, they are not virtues, they are remnants of survival. Many resist this separation because it feels like betrayal. The internalized mother, still alive in your psyche, whispers, "You owe me." Stay close, don't change too much, but this is not her conscious voice. It is the voice of your attachment to who she needed you to be, the voice of the patterns that have kept you bound, through guilt, obligation, fear, and unresolved love. True emotional separation is not abandonment. It is a reordering of inner authority. It is the moment you stop seeking her validation to define your worth. It is the moment you stop blaming her for your limitations. It is the sacred turning point when your inner compass shifts from outward allegiance to inward truth. You no longer need to carry her dreams, or her sorrows, or her fears like a second skin. You no longer need to filter your becoming through the lens of what she might think or feel. This process may stir grief, the grief of letting go of the ideal mother, the fantasy that one day she will become who you needed her to be. It may stir rage, the rage of realizing how much of your life was lived in reaction to her wounds. And it may stir guilt, the guilt of walking a path she may not understand or approve of. But all of these feelings are part of the sacred rite of passage from fusion to freedom. The goal is not to discard her, but to differentiate from her, to see her as she truly is, no longer the omnipotent figure of childhood, but a human being with her own unmet needs, her own unspoken traumas, her own unfinished journey. When you can see her clearly, you can finally see yourself clearly. The projection dissolves, the roles fall away, And what remains is a self that is no longer defined by reaction, but by revelation. To individuate is to become your own inner parent, to hold the parts of you that were abandoned, silenced, or distorted, to create space for your own values, your own rhythms, your own life, and in doing so, something miraculous happens. You begin to love her from a distance that is no longer distorted by need. You begin to love yourself from a depth that was once unreachable. This is the silent revolution of healing, not loud, not grand, but steady, a quiet reclaiming of your soul from the hands of history, a return to yourself after a lifetime of living as someone else's reflection.